Poinsettia, Chapter 13. Gavin looked over the poorly written letter once again. Oh, how it strained his brain for him to read it. What have I done? You follow that kind heart within you that you keep pretending you don't have, came Clementine's reply, as she sat before the vanity, brushing her hair. I think it's a marvelous and generous idea. How would you know? You'd never met this boy. In fact, I've never met this boy either. I don't need some primitive child tearing up my beautiful castle. Yet you agreed to help him? You insisted. Which makes you what? Gavin turned up his nose. Still a fire within you. It annoys me so sometimes. Yet you always thrive on it, she pointed out, getting up and placing her hands on his shoulder. Patience. You've turned a barred maiden into a lady. Can you turn the child into nobility as well? What choice have I? Gavin asked. He is family. Distant family, but family, nevertheless. When will he arrive? Clementine asked cheerfully. Any moment, really. As if on cue, the horses sounded outside. Clementine let out a happy noise, lifting her skirt and trotting out to the hall and down the stairs towards the front of the castle. Gavin raced after her. She may have improved her stride, but she was still clumsy. By the time they reached the door, Angus was already inside. He was looking over the massive grand hall entrance and went wide-eyed at the reception of two coming to greet him. Are you Angus MacDoodle? Clementine asked, smiling brightly at him. Aye. He looked her over. Are you the lady of the house? Clementine stumbled on that one and glanced at Gavin. He seemed rather professional, as always. Boy, I am the lord of the house. I am Lord Gavin McIntyre. This is Lady Clementine. I suppose one could call her the lady of the house. Clementine smiled with a little blush. You're being so regal, Gavin. Let's get him freshened up. Look how skinny he is. I bet he's starving. Without waiting for his reply, she took Angus's wrist and pulled him along. Gavin watched as she toted the boy up the stairs. He narrowed his eyes. Werewolf. Angus and Gavin obviously had gotten off on the wrong foot. The two always bickered when they were close to one another. Clementine seemed to always find herself calming them. After one particular fight, Angus had stormed to his room, merely agitating Gavin. But Clementine had rushed after the boy, inviting herself in. Angus? Come on down. Over me dead body, he pouted. What a horrible man! She smiled at his accent. It was quite heavy, but she knew in time it would probably lessen the more familiar he became with the way they spoke here. Gavin is a very kind man if you give him a chance. He's a dirty vampire. I should have just stayed with the clan. At least we all looked out for one another. Clementine sighed. You two just come from different backgrounds. Me too. You just have to give him a chance. And perhaps he needs to give you one too. How did you end up with him? By chance, she said calmly. He doesn't think you like him, and it's making him defensive. The reason we didn't like each other is beyond your comprehension, lady. Then fill me in. I told you, he shouted, getting to his feet. He's a vampire. I'm not saying it as an insult, but a fact. A vampire. Vampires are solitary unless they take mates. But I am a werewolf. Everyone knows that vampires and werewolves are bitter enemies. We can never be friends. Says who? Clementine persisted. I've never seen the vampire, Angus. And I've never seen the werewolf. What I see is a man and a boy who cannot connect. Rather than live up to some fairy tale expectations, why not be yourself and try to see each other for who you both are inside? He wouldn't want me. But he does. It was his final decision that brought you here, Angus. It meant he was willing to care for you. But he can't do it alone, even with me. You need to meet him halfway. You think it will work? I promise, she smiled. And she was right. Angus soon had to realize that he wasn't up in the Highlands anymore. He was living in the lap of luxury and had to behave at least a little better than he had. He lightened up on his stubborn ways, finding Gavin slowly did the same. It took a whole year for them to be able to tolerate one another alone, even coming to enjoy each other. Angus had many fun and exciting stories to tell about his home, and had a grand imagination, which Gavin never tired of hearing. And likewise, Gavin had many experiences he shared with him. The three of them lived like one big happy family. Like all things in life, even this euphoria came to an end. Angus went from being a stubborn boy to becoming the lead of the house. He commanded any and all servants beneath him. He was the personal page. Gavin had made him the number one. It perhaps was just as well. In March of 1826, Clementine had become pregnant. In a sense, such a thing was a scandal, for Gavin had never wed her. But still, she lived as his beloved, and he referred to her and treated her as such, his equal, and in his mind his wife. Perhaps it made sense. They had no formal wedding, but they had engaged over the last few years in a full-blown relationship, in which she could no longer resist her feelings for him. One can only imagine that Gavin had claimed her as a vampire's mate, rather than a Christian wife. To the creatures of the dark world, a vampire's mate mark was just as solidifying, if not more so, of a permanent relationship. Angus took command of many of the chores and responsibilities of the house. Gavin was quite entranced about experiencing as much time with Clementine as possible. The pregnancy was smooth and easy. One would never know she was with child if not for her bulging belly, for she experienced no real suffering. This blessedness came to an end in November of that same year. That was when Clementine gave birth to her and Gavin's daughter, Karasu. Gavin had named her, for she was like a little goddess to him. It was a bittersweet gift. He got a beautiful child from the experience. But alas, Clementine had, despite an easy pregnancy, a difficult birth. She passed away only a few days later. It was almost 1 year later that Angus, Gavin, and Karasu were removed from the castle by the church. Gavin would have normally fought to the death for his castle, and Angus was prepared to help him do so. But a battle on the homestead meant putting Karasu in danger. Gavin couldn't bear to chance losing her as well. Cutting his losses, they vacated, downgrading to a mansion on the other side of town. Any plans for revenge were extinguished when the hospital and orphanage were erected from the confiscated castle. It was a noble cause, and one even the scorned vampire sympathized. In fact, it worked to his advantage. When his beloved Karasu reached the age of 5, she began to fall ill. This in itself was worrisome to Gavin. Karasu was a dhampir, half vampire and half human. By any rate, she should have had all the strength of a young vampire and the sweet disposition of a human being. But this strange affliction of illness was disturbing and unfounded. When he could not find a way to treat her himself, he swallowed his pride and took her to McIntyre Castle, which had become St. Raphael's Children's Home and Hospital. Church-owned or not, the staff was unable to turn him or his daughter away. Gavin agreed to be the patron of the hospital, relinquishing any hard feelings of his eviction in return. His greatest compassion came from this sympathy. Before Clementine's death, she had asked him to pawn off all of her possessions that he had acquired for her over the years, and put the money he received as her contribution to a worthy cause. After much consideration, Gavin took the money he had put away from her belongings, as well as a hefty amount he personally set aside, to create the Poinsettia Fund. Why the poinsettia? It was an exotic flower that Gavin enjoyed importing from the New World. Clementine and Karasu both enjoyed them as well. He always made sure that Karasu got one before Christmas. He planned to continue that tradition with her, even when she was in the hospital. But seeing the hopelessness and despair in the eyes and souls and hearts of the other children, he made sure every one of them got one as well. He had toyed with the idea of ending the tradition at Karasu's death, but he had grown to love the children. He had covered many of the expenses. Many were Caradon's friends. Caradon's death hit hard with Gavin, but perhaps it hit Angus even worse. He had been her playmate, and he loved her most of all. He grew just as faithful to the children of St. Raphael. If she loved them, then he would love them too.